On my 70th birthday, my daughter-in-law smeared cake on my face and screamed, "This old fool doesn't deserve anything." The guests erupted in laughter while my son stood frozen in silence. I calmly wiped the frosting away, approached her, and whispered 2 words. Her face went white as chalk. The chocolate frosting struck with enough force to snap my head back. A peculiar silence followed, the kind that comes after a car crash or a slap. Then Kimberly's voice sliced through it. "You old fool. You don't deserve anything. You've clung to this house long enough." 30 guests stood frozen in my living room, champagne glasses suspended mid-air. My 70th birthday cake, German chocolate, my favorite, now dripped down my navy suit onto the Persian rug I'd purchased with my first judge's salary. The same rug where Stephen, my son, had taken his first steps 42 years ago. Through the blur of frosting, I watched Heather Wilson, Kimberly's business partner, double over with laughter. 3 of their real estate friends joined in, their cackling sharp and calculated. Margaret, my neighbor, covered her mouth in shock. David, my former courthouse colleague, looked like he wanted to intervene but couldn't process what he'd witnessed. Stephen stood near the fireplace. Our eyes met for 1 second. I waited for him to move, to speak, to do something. He looked at his shoes instead. "Did you see his face?" Heather gasped between laughs, pulling out her phone. "I got it on video." The rational part of my brain, the part that had presided over criminal trials for 3 decades, catalogued every detail. Kimberly's flushed cheeks and rapid breathing suggested adrenaline, not alcohol. The slight tremor in her hands indicated nervousness despite her bold action. This wasn't spontaneous. This was planned. I reached for a linen napkin and methodically cleaned my face. 30 years on the federal bench had taught me to control my reactions. I'd heard defendants call me worse than old fool. I'd watched murderers smirk at their victims' families. A daughter-in-law with frosting on her fingers was hardly the worst thing I'd faced. But the disrespect burned. Not the cake, not the words, but the calculated cruelty of choosing this moment, this place, in front of everyone who'd known me for decades. I walked toward Kimberly. She stood her ground, chin lifted, eyes defiant. Up close, I noticed the slight pulse jumping in her neck, fear masked by aggression. I'd seen that combination 1,000 times in my courtroom. I leaned close enough that only she could hear. 2 words, spoken softly. "Your father." The color drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug. Her pupils dilated. Her mouth opened, then closed. She took 1 stumbling step backward, reaching for the armchair to steady herself. Then her eyes rolled back and her knees buckled. I caught her before she hit the floor, old reflexes from 40 years of martial arts practice. She was lighter than I expected, all sharp angles and expensive perfume. Her head lolled against my shoulder, completely unconscious. "Kimberly." Stephen finally moved, rushing over with panic written across his face. "What did you do to her?" "Dad, what the hell did you say?" "I think someone should call 911, Margaret said, her voice shaking. "She'll be fine," I said, lowering Kimberly gently onto my leather sofa. "Just fainted. Stephen, get some water." "You provoked her." Stephen's face was red now, his finger jabbing toward me accusingly. "This is your fault. You always have to, you can't just—" He couldn't even finish a sentence. My son, who used to debate politics with me over Sunday breakfast, who'd inherited my sharp mind if not my backbone, was reduced to sputtering fragments. "The party's over," I announced to the room. My voice carried the same authority it had when clearing my courtroom. "Thank you all for coming. I apologize for the disruption." People scattered like startled birds. Within minutes, only Stephen remained, kneeling beside his unconscious wife, dabbing her forehead with a damp cloth. Heather had vanished the moment Kimberly fell. Interesting. I stood in my doorway, watching neighbors hurry to their cars, watching David throw me a concerned look over his shoulder. The March evening air was cool against my frosting-covered shirt. My house, my sanctuary for 45 years, suddenly felt like a battlefield. Kimberly's eyes fluttered open. She looked around, disoriented, then her gaze locked onto mine. The fear in her expression told me everything I needed to know. She knew that I knew. After everyone left and Kimberly recovered enough to walk, refusing any medical attention, I stood alone in my study. Chocolate frosting had dried on my collar. I caught my reflection in the glass-fronted bookcase. A 70-year-old man in a ruined suit, looking every bit the old fool Kimberly had called me. The irony wasn't lost on me. I poured 2 fingers of bourbon, Woodford Reserve, the good stuff I saved for occasions, and sat at my desk. The desk where I'd written hundreds of legal opinions, where I'd prepared for countless trials. On the wall above hung my diplomas, my law degree from Georgetown, certificates for my years of service, a photograph of my swearing-in ceremony. And there, in a silver frame on the corner of my desk, a photo from Stephen's wedding 8 years ago. Kimberly in white, radiant and young. Stephen beaming with an arm around her. I stood beside them in my best suit, proud father of the groom, completely oblivious to the trap closing around me. I opened my laptop and pulled up a file I hadn't looked at in 15 years. Case number 2010-4729, United States versus Vincent Foster. The memory came back sharp and clear. The courtroom had been packed that November day. Foster sat at the defendant's table in an expensive suit that couldn't hide his guilt. His attorney, some hotshot from Miami, had argued for leniency. "Your Honor, Mr. Foster has a family, a daughter in college." This was a mistake, not a pattern of behavior. I'd reviewed the evidence thoroughly. Vincent Foster had orchestrated a real estate investment scheme that defrauded 14 families of their retirement savings. $3.2 million stolen through fabricated property values and falsified inspection reports. Elderly couples who trusted him with their life's work found themselves with worthless deeds and empty bank accounts. "Mr. Foster," I'd said from the bench, "you didn't just steal money. You stole futures, security, peace of mind. The law requires I consider your remorse and potential for rehabilitation, but the evidence shows calculated, prolonged deception. 12 years in federal prison." The gavel had fallen. Foster's face crumpled. In the gallery, a young woman, maybe 22, had burst into tears. Dark hair, thin frame, eyes filled with rage as she stared at me. His daughter, I'd assumed. I'd felt sympathy for her then. Children shouldn't pay for their parents' crimes. I never connected that tearful young woman with the polished real estate agent my son brought home 7 years later. Why would I? She'd introduced herself as Kimberly Lee, her mother's maiden name, I now realized. She'd been charming, attentive, full of admiration for our family history. She'd laughed at my courtroom stories, asked intelligent questions about constitutional law, treated me with what I believed was genuine respect. "Dad, I really think Kimberly's the one," Stephen had said over coffee at the Blue Marlin in January 2017. The restaurant's windows overlooked Sarasota Bay, boats bobbing in the morning light. "I know it's fast, but when you know, right?" I'd wanted to believe in love at first sight. I'd wanted my son to be happy. So I'd ignored the small inconsistencies, how Kimberly never talked about her father, how she'd changed the subject whenever family history came up, how she'd been oddly insistent about moving into my house instead of finding their own place. "It's such a beautiful home," she'd said, smiling that perfect smile. "And you have so much space. We could save for our own house while helping you out. Win-win." The bourbon burned going down. I'd been a federal judge. I'd spent 30 years evaluating evidence, detecting lies, seeing through manipulation. And I'd missed it completely, because she was my son's choice, because I'd wanted to trust her. The warning signs had been there, how she'd measured the rooms with her eyes, commenting on property values and market conditions, how she'd befriended all our neighbors, asking questions about the neighborhood, about my finances, about my plans for retirement, how she'd gradually inserted herself into every aspect of my life while simultaneously creating distance between Stephen and me. "Your dad's so old-fashioned," I'd overheard her tell Stephen last Christmas. "He doesn't understand modern relationships. Maybe you shouldn't tell him about our business plans. He'll just worry." I opened another file on my laptop, my personal records. The house at 2847, Magnolia Drive had been appraised at $890,000 last year. Combined with my retirement savings and investments, $340,000, my estate totaled $1,230,000. Not a fortune by some standards, but enough to be worth scheming for. Enough to be worth 8 years of pretending. The realization settled over me like cold water. Kimberly hadn't fainted from shock at my party. She'd fainted because she understood in that instant that her elaborate revenge plot had just collapsed. I knew who she really was. I knew why she'd married my son. And most importantly, she knew that I knew. 8 years of her life invested in this long game. 8 years of playing the dutiful daughter-in-law, all while plotting to destroy me from the inside. The daughter of a convicted criminal seeking justice, or was it vengeance, against the judge who'd sent her father to prison. I couldn't entirely blame her for hating me. From her perspective, I'd broken her family. But Vincent Foster had broken himself. I'd simply held him accountable. The difference was I'd done it lawfully. Whatever Kimberly was planning, and after tonight I was certain she was planning something, wouldn't be legal. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Victor Bennett. We'd worked together for 20 years back when he was a prosecutor and I was on the bench. Now he specialized in estate law. We'd had dinner just last month, discussing our mutual love of antique clocks and complaining about Florida humidity. Tomorrow morning, I decided. I'd call Victor tomorrow. Not to punish Kimberly. Not yet. First, I needed to understand exactly what she was planning. Then I needed to protect what was mine. And then I'd show her what real justice looked like. I finished my bourbon, changed out of my ruined suit, and went to my workshop in the garage. On my bench sat a 1923 Waltham pocket watch I'd been restoring for 3 months. The mechanism was delicate, requiring patience and steady hands. One wrong move could destroy something valuable. I picked up my jeweler's loupe and got to work. Funny how fixing broken things always helped me think clearly. By the time I went to bed at midnight, I had a plan forming. Not revenge. I'd spent too many years on the bench to confuse justice with vengeance. But accountability, consequences, protection. Kimberly thought she was playing a long game. She had no idea how patient I could be, or how thoroughly a federal judge learns to document everything. 5 days after Victor and I met at the Blue Marlin, I sat in my study watching the security camera feed on my laptop. The cameras had been installed years ago after a break-in attempt in the neighborhood, but I'd never paid much attention to them. Now they felt like windows into a world I'd been living in but never truly seeing. On screen, Kimberly paced the kitchen while talking on her phone. Stephen sat at the dining table, head in his hands. Even without audio, the body language told a story. Her aggressive gestures, his defeated slouch. My son looked like a puppet with cut strings. I needed information. Real, actionable intelligence. Victor had been clear about that during our meeting. Frank, he'd said, stirring his coffee with deliberate precision, suspicion isn't enough. If Kimberly's planning something, we need proof. Documentation. Evidence that would hold up in court. I was a federal judge for 3 decades, I'd replied. I know what constitutes evidence. Then you also know that emotions cloud judgment. Hire someone objective. Someone who does this professionally. He'd slid a business card across the table. Sarah King, Private Investigations. The card was simple, understated. Just a name, phone number, and a small magnifying glass icon. No flashy tagline. No promises. Professional. On March 18th, I called the number. Sarah answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and businesslike. King Investigations. My name is Frank Harris. I need someone to investigate my daughter-in-law. Family matter? Yes. I charge $150 per hour plus expenses. 3-hour minimum. Deposit up front. That's $450. Investigation typically runs 2 to 3 weeks for basic surveillance and financial checks. Are you looking for infidelity, financial malfeasance, or something else? Her directness was refreshing. No false sympathy, no prying questions, just facts. Financial malfeasance and potential conspiracy to commit fraud. There was a pause. That's more complex. I'd estimate $3,500 for a thorough investigation, including surveillance, financial records review, and documented evidence suitable for legal proceedings. When can you start? Tomorrow. We met the next morning at a coffee shop in downtown Sarasota, neutral territory. Sarah King was nothing like the investigators in movies. No trench coat, no cigarettes, no gruff demeanor. She was maybe 52, wearing a navy blazer and carrying a leather portfolio. She looked like someone's accountant, which I suppose was the point. "Tell me what you know," she said, pulling out a legal pad. I explained everything: the birthday party incident, Vincent Foster, Kimberly's hidden identity, the strange behavior I'd noticed over the past year, her increasing interest in my financial affairs, her subtle questions about my will, the way she'd positioned herself between Stephen and me. "What do you think she's planning?" Sarah asked, pen poised. "I think she wants to declare me incompetent, take control of my estate through Stephen." "Has she made any concrete moves in that direction?" "Not yet. But I feel it coming. Call it 30 years of reading people." Sarah nodded. "You mentioned you own the house they're living in, 2847 Magnolia Drive. You bought it in 1980. They moved in after the wedding in 2017. That gives us options. As the property owner, you can legally install monitoring devices in common areas: kitchen, living room, dining room. Not bedrooms or bathrooms, obviously. Florida is a two-party consent state for phone conversations, but there are exceptions for property owners protecting their interests. You're talking about bugs. I'm talking about audio monitoring in your own home, which is legal with proper documentation. She met my eyes. "Mr. Harris, if your daughter-in-law is planning to defraud you, she'll discuss it. People always talk. They think they're safe in their own home. They get comfortable. How long would it take to install?" "I can have a technician there this afternoon while they're at work. Small devices, completely invisible. Voice-activated recording. Everything uploaded to a secure cloud server that only you and I can access." I thought about the ethics of it. 30 years on the bench had taught me the importance of due process, of respecting privacy. But this was my home, my property. And if Kimberly was conspiring to rob me of my autonomy, my assets, my dignity, then I had every right to protect myself. "Do it," I said. The next 3 weeks were educational. I'd thought I knew manipulation when I saw it. I'd presided over fraud cases, embezzlement trials, con artists of every variety. But watching it unfold in my own home, hearing it through those tiny microphones, was different. Kimberly was good. Very good. On March 22nd, I listened to her on the phone with Heather Wilson. The old man's losing it, I swear. Yesterday he couldn't remember where he put his reading glasses. They were on his head. Laughter. "No, Stephen doesn't see it yet. He's in denial." But I'm documenting everything. Dates, times, incidents. We'll need witness statements when we petition the court. The glasses had been on my desk. I'd known exactly where they were. But I'd played confused just for a moment, testing a theory. She'd pounced on it like a cat on a wounded bird. On March 24th, another call. "My lawyer says we need at least 6 witnesses, people who've observed the mental decline. Can you get your boyfriend and his sister to sign statements? I'll pay them $500 each. Call it a consultation fee for their time." Buying false testimony. My hands clenched listening to that recording. On March 29th, I heard her coaching Stephen. "Honey, your dad's not the man he used to be. I know you don't want to see it, but someone has to take responsibility. What if he falls? What if he has an accident? We'd never forgive ourselves. This isn't about the house, it's about keeping him safe." The concern in her voice was masterful. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed it myself. April 3rd brought the real revelation. Kimberly and Heather in my living room, discussing their real estate agency. "We're bleeding money, Kim. The loan payment is $4,200. We're behind on office rent, $8,100. And we've only closed 2 properties this quarter." I know. Just hold on until July. Once Stephen has power of attorney, we sell this place, split the proceeds. The house is worth $890,000. Even after paying off our debts, we'll clear enough to restart the business properly. What about Frank? What about him? He'll be in a nice assisted living facility. Stephen signs the papers. The old man doesn't get a vote. I sat in my study, headphones on, listening to them plan my life like I was already gone. The cold calculation of it. The casual dismissal of my existence. But here's what they didn't understand. Every word they spoke was being recorded, time-stamped, documented, admissible as evidence under Florida law because they were discussing conspiracy to commit fraud in my home, which I had every legal right to monitor. Sarah King delivered the full report on April 8th. 47 pages of transcripts, financial records showing the $89,000 in business debt, bank statements revealing the monthly bleeding of $4,200 in loan payments, copies of text messages between Kimberly and various witnesses promising payment for statements. This is ironclad, Sarah said, tapping the report. Everything here is legally obtained and admissible. If she tries to file for guardianship or incompetency, you can bury her with this. I paid her the remaining balance. $3,500 felt like the bargain of the century. She left me with the evidence of my daughter-in-law's betrayal, neatly organized in a leather binder. That evening, I made myself a bourbon and sat on my back porch. The sun was setting over Sarasota Bay, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Somewhere in my house, Kimberly was probably planning her next move. Stephen was probably convincing himself that controlling his father was an act of love rather than theft. They thought I was the prey, an old man, alone and vulnerable, easy pickings for a patient predator. They had no idea the prey was watching back. On April 10th, I drove to downtown Sarasota for a meeting that would change everything. The morning was warm, humidity already building even though it was barely 9 o'clock. I parked my Lexus on Main Street and walked 3 blocks to the office building at 156 Main Street. Victor Bennett's law practice occupied the entire 7th floor. I'd been here before. Back when he was prosecuting cases and I was on the bench, we'd occasionally meet for lunch in the building's lobby restaurant. Now he specialized in estate law, trusts, and asset protection. His timing and mine couldn't have been better. The receptionist showed me to a conference room where Victor waited with another man I didn't recognize. Both stood as I entered. "Frank, good to see you." Victor shook my hand firmly. "This is Herbert Morgan. He's the notary I mentioned, and one of the best estate planners in Florida. 25 years of experience." Herbert Morgan was older than Victor, maybe 73, with steel-gray hair and sharp blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His handshake was firm despite his age. "Judge Harris, it's an honor. I followed several of your cases over the years. The Palmetto fraud case in 2008 was textbook legal reasoning." "You're kind to remember," I said. "Though I'm not a judge anymore. Just Frank. Force of habit." Herbert smiled. "Shall we get to business?" We sat around the conference table. Victor had coffee waiting, black, the way I liked it. Always the details with him. "I reviewed the investigator's report you sent," Victor began, sliding a copy across the table. "It's damning. Conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted manipulation of legal proceedings, solicitation of false testimony. If Kimberly follows through with her plan, she's looking at potential criminal charges, not just civil liability. But we need to be proactive," Herbert added. "Right now, if something happened to you, a stroke, an accident, anything that left you incapacitated, Stephen would likely be appointed your guardian by default. He's your only child, next of kin, no evidence of bad intent on his part. Even though his wife is the one pulling the strings? Even then. The court looks at relationships, not motivations. And once he's appointed guardian, he has legal authority to make decisions about your assets, your care, your living situation." I sipped my coffee, feeling the weight of what we were discussing. "So we need to make sure that can't happen." "Exactly." Victor pulled out a document. "We create a living trust. You transfer all your assets into it, the house, your investments, your savings. Total value approximately $1,230,000, correct. $890,000 for the house, $340,000 in retirement accounts and investments. Yes. The trust becomes the legal owner of these assets. You remain the trustee, you control everything, make all decisions exactly as you do now. But if you become incapacitated, the trust documents specify who takes over as successor trustee. Not Stephen, I said. Not Stephen. We'll name me as successor trustee. I'll manage the assets according to your wishes, which we'll document very clearly. Herbert leaned forward. Here's the elegant part. We'll name the Florida Legal Aid Society as the primary beneficiary of the trust upon your death. I raised an eyebrow. Not Stephen at all? Not initially. But, and this is key, we include a provision. Stephen can become the beneficiary again if he demonstrates, within 180 days, that he's worthy of that trust. Documented acts of respect, responsibility, and genuine care for your well-being. A test, I said. An opportunity, Herbert corrected gently. We're not punishing Stephen. We're protecting you and giving him a chance to prove he's not under his wife's control. Victor pulled out another document. We'll also create a power of attorney for health care and finances, naming me as your attorney-in-fact. That means even if someone tries to have you declared incompetent, I'm the only one who can make decisions on your behalf. Not Stephen, not Kimberly, not a court-appointed guardian. The power of attorney supersedes all of that. Is this legal? It seems almost too convenient. Completely legal, Herbert assured me. Florida law is very protective of advance directives. As long as you're mentally competent when you sign these documents, and we'll have medical evaluation to prove that, they're ironclad. Kimberly can file all the petitions she wants. The court will see you've already made provisions, and they'll honor them. We spent the next 3 hours going through every detail. The trust language, the succession provisions, the specific criteria Stephen would need to meet, documented visits, genuine conversation, acts of care not motivated by financial gain. Herbert and Victor had thought of everything. One more thing, I said as we were wrapping up. I don't want Kimberly to know about this yet. If she finds out I've protected the assets, she might accelerate her plans or try something more desperate. Agreed, Victor said. We'll file all the necessary documents, but keep them quiet. The trust doesn't become public record until you die. The power of attorney only activates if you're incapacitated. For now, from the outside, everything looks exactly the same. How long to finalize this? We can have everything drafted by tomorrow, signed and notarized by April 15th. 5 days. We shook hands all around. As I left Victor's office, I felt something I hadn't felt since the birthday party. Control. Not revenge. Not yet, but the solid foundation of a strategy. I drove home and parked in my usual spot. Through the living room window, I could see Kimberly on her laptop, probably working on her real estate business, or maybe drafting more evidence of my declining mental state. I walked inside carrying my briefcase. She looked up, her expression carefully neutral. Hey, Frank. Where were you? Doctor's appointment, I lied smoothly. Just a checkup. Everything okay? Perfect health for a 70-year-old. I smiled at her. Doctor says I've got another 20 years easy. Her smile flickered for just a fraction of a second. There, that micro-expression of disappointment. She'd been hoping for bad news, hoping for a diagnosis that would support her narrative. That's wonderful, she said, recovering quickly. Stephen will be so relieved. I'm sure he will. I went to my study and closed the door. From my desk drawer, I pulled out Sarah King's 47-page report and placed it next to the draft trust documents Victor had given me. 2 pieces of a puzzle that would protect everything I'd built. Kimberly thought she was playing chess, moving pieces carefully, planning several moves ahead. What she didn't realize was that I had already seen her entire strategy, and I was playing a different game entirely. In 5 days, on April 15th, I would sign documents that would make her 8 years of scheming worthless. My assets would be protected, my autonomy secured. Stephen would have a chance to prove himself or lose everything. And the beautiful part? She wouldn't know until it was far too late. I opened my laptop and pulled up the security camera feeds. In the living room, Kimberly was on her phone again, probably calling Heather, probably discussing their next move. Let them plan. Let them scheme. Every word they spoke was being recorded. Every lie they told was building my case. They were constructing the evidence of their own downfall, one conversation at a time. I poured myself a small bourbon, just a finger, it was only noon after all, and allowed myself a smile. They wanted to hunt me like prey. They wanted to take what I'd spent a lifetime building. They wanted to rob me of my dignity, my home, my autonomy. What they didn't understand was this. I'd spent 30 years in the federal court system. I knew law, evidence, strategy. I knew how to build an airtight case. I knew patience. And I knew exactly how to give them enough rope to hang themselves. The game had changed. They just didn't know it yet. The weeks after signing the trust documents passed with excruciating slowness. I played my part perfectly. The slightly forgetful old man, misplacing keys I knew exactly where I'd left them, asking Stephen to repeat things I'd heard clearly the first time. Every confused moment was calculated. Every hesitation was theater. Kimberly watched me like a hawk studying a wounded rabbit. I could see the satisfaction in her eyes each time I pretended to forget something. She was documenting it all, I knew, building her case, counting down to July when she'd finally make her move. But I'd moved first. She just didn't know it yet. On May 12th, they came to my study. I was at my desk, sorting through old photographs, a genuinely enjoyable task that required no pretense. Stephen knocked softly on the doorframe. Kimberly stood beside him, her hand on his arm in a gesture that looked supportive but was really controlling. I'd learned to read those subtle touches. "Dad, do you have a minute?" Stephen's voice was strained. "We need to talk about something important." I set down the photograph I'd been holding. Stephen at age 7, gap-toothed and holding a fishing rod, and gestured to the chairs across from my desk. "Of course. Come in." They sat. Kimberly crossed her legs, smoothed her skirt, and arranged her face into an expression of warm concern. She'd practiced that look. 8 years of practice, probably. "Frank, we're worried about you," she began, her voice honey-sweet. "You've seemed a bit scattered lately, forgetting things, getting confused about dates and appointments." "Have I?" I kept my voice mild, curious. "You have, Dad." Stephen wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at his hands instead, fingers laced together so tightly his knuckles were white. "Last week you couldn't remember where you'd parked at the grocery store. And you've asked me about the same property tax bill 3 times. I had parked in my usual spot, Bay 7, and I had asked about the tax bill once. But I let the lies sit between us, heavy and obvious. We think," Kimberly continued, reaching into her designer handbag, "it might be time to consider some help managing things. Just to take the pressure off you. Let you enjoy your retirement without worrying about bills and finances and all that stressful paperwork." She pulled out a folder, placed it on my desk with the careful reverence of someone presenting something precious. Inside were legal documents, already prepared, already notarized in places, just waiting for signatures. I opened the folder, read slowly, carefully. Financial power of attorney. Appointment of Stephen as my legal guardian for financial matters. Authorization to access all bank accounts, investment portfolios, property deeds. Everything. They wanted everything. "This is very thorough," I said finally. "You've put a lot of thought into this." "We have." Kimberly leaned forward, her perfume, expensive, wafting across my desk. "We love you, Frank. We just want to make sure you're taken care of." I looked at Stephen. Really looked at him. 42 years old. My son. The boy I'd taught to ride a bike, to throw a baseball, to stand up for what was right. When had he become this person who'd sit silently while his wife tried to rob his father? "Stephen," I said quietly, "do you remember Vincent Foster?" His head snapped up. "What?" "Vincent Foster. The fraud case from 2010. I sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison for running a real estate investment scam. I don't. Stephen glanced at Kimberly. What does that have to do with? He had a daughter. 22 years old at the time. She sat in the courtroom gallery and cried when I read the sentence. I felt sorry for her then. She was young. It wasn't her fault her father was a criminal. The color was draining from Kimberly's face, her perfectly composed expression cracking at the edges. Interesting thing about that daughter, I continued, my voice still calm, still conversational. Her name was Kimberly Foster. After her father went to prison, she legally changed her surname to Lee, her mother's maiden name. And then, in 2017, she married a man named Stephen Harris. The silence in my study was absolute. I could hear the antique clock on my shelf ticking, each second falling like a hammer. Stephen, I said, did you know your wife is Vincent Foster's daughter? That's ridiculous. Kimberly's voice was too loud, too sharp. Frank, this is exactly what we're worried about. These paranoid delusions. I opened my desk drawer, pulled out the folder I'd prepared, laid out the documents one by one on my desk, facing them like evidence in a trial. Birth certificate, Kimberly and Foster, born June 15, 1988. Legal name change document, Kimberly and Foster to Kimberly and Lee, filed March 2011. Court photograph, Vincent Foster at his sentencing, his daughter in the gallery behind him, her face twisted with grief and rage. These aren't delusions, I said. These are facts. Stephen picked up the birth certificate with shaking hands, stared at it like it was written in a foreign language. Kim, is this real? Your father destroyed my family. Kimberly was on her feet now, all pretense of concern evaporated. Her face was flushed, her hands clenched into fists. He took my father away for 12 years. 12 years? For what? For trying to provide for his family? For making a few mistakes in paperwork? For defrauding 14 families out of $3.2 million, I corrected. For fabricating property values and falsifying inspection reports. For stealing the retirement savings of people who trusted him. You had no right to judge him. No right to destroy our lives. I had every right. I was a federal judge, and he was guilty. I stood up slowly, placing my palms flat on my desk. What I didn't have, Kimberly, was the knowledge that 15 years later his daughter would marry my son under a false identity for the sole purpose of revenge. That's not, I didn't, but her denials were weak. The truth was written all over her face. Stephen stood, the papers falling from his hands. You lied to me. About your name, about your family, about everything. Stephen, please. Did you ever love me? His voice broke. Or was I just a tool to get back at him? Kimberly's mouth opened, closed. No answer came. You need to leave my study, I said quietly. Both of you. Stephen, take some time to think. Really think about who you've been listening to. Stephen walked out without another word. Kimberly stayed for a moment longer, her eyes meeting mine with pure hatred. This isn't over, she whispered. You think you're so clever, but I'm not done. You have no idea what I'm capable of. Actually, I replied, I have a very good idea. I've been listening to your plans for weeks now. Every conversation with Heather. Every scheme to have me declared incompetent. Every dollar of your $89,000 in debt. I know everything, Kimberly. The only question is, what are you going to do now that you know I know? She left without answering. But I didn't need an answer. I knew exactly what she'd do. She'd attack. Desperately, recklessly. And I'd be ready. 2 weeks of silence. Stephen moved into the guest bedroom. The house felt like a Cold War zone, careful avoidance and closed doors. I continued my routines, morning coffee on the porch, afternoon work in my clock workshop, evening reading in my study. But the tension was suffocating. On May 27th, the counterattack came. A courier arrived at my door at 9:47 a.m. with legal documents. I signed for them, knowing exactly what they were before I opened the envelope. Court petition for incompetency evaluation, filed by Kimberly Harris, co-signed by Stephen Harris. I called Victor immediately. She filed, I said. Expected. What's she claiming? I read through the petition. It was thorough. I had to give her that. 6 witness statements from her friends. Detailed accounts of my alleged mental decline. Forgotten conversations, confusion about dates, aggressive outbursts, paranoid accusations. There were even video clips, apparently showing me disoriented in various locations, all fabricated or deliberately misinterpreted, of course. But on paper, it looked convincing. She's claiming I'm a danger to myself, that I've made baseless accusations against her, threatened her, shown signs of dementia and paranoia. And Stephen signed it. I found his signature at the bottom, next to Kimberly's. My son's handwriting. He did. He thinks he's protecting you, Victor said. She's convinced him this is about your health, not her scheme. The hearing is June 24th. 3 weeks. Perfect. That gives us time to prepare. Frank, are you ready for this? I thought about the 47-page report in my safe, the audio recordings of Kimberly planning my downfall, the trust documents that had already moved my assets beyond her reach, the power of attorney that made Victor, not Stephen, my legal representative. I've been ready since April 15th, I said. Let's show them what real preparation looks like. The weeks crawled by. Kimberly grew bolder, more confident. She must have thought the legal filing was her trump card. I'd catch her smiling sometimes, that small secret smile of someone who thinks they've already won. I continued to act slightly confused, slightly uncertain. Let her think the stress was getting to me. Let her believe she'd broken me. On June 3rd, the court summons arrived officially. Competency hearing, June 24th, 10 a.m., Sarasota County Court, Judge Margaret Cole presiding. Margaret Cole. I'd worked with her for 15 years before my retirement. Sharp mind, no tolerance for nonsense. If Kimberly thought she'd get a sympathetic ear, she was in for a surprise. I spent the intervening weeks with Victor, preparing. We rehearsed questions and answers, reviewed the evidence, made sure every document was in order, every recording properly labeled and time-stamped. This is going to destroy her case completely, Victor said on June 20th, 4 days before the hearing. The question is whether you want to press criminal charges afterward. Conspiracy to commit fraud, solicitation of false testimony, these are serious crimes. Let's see how the hearing goes first, I replied. I want justice, Victor, not just revenge. June 24th arrived, cool and clear. I wore my best Navy suit, the same one I'd worn to hundreds of court sessions when I was on the bench. Victor picked me up at 8:30 a.m. Stephen and Kimberly were already at the courthouse when we arrived, sitting with their attorney, a young man in an ill-fitting suit who looked nervous. The courtroom was smaller than the ones I'd presided over, but the smell was the same, old wood polish and tension. We took our seats. Judge Cole entered at precisely 10. All rise. Court is now in session. The Honorable Margaret Cole presiding. Margaret looked at me over her reading glasses, a brief flicker of recognition, maybe sympathy. Then her face returned to judicial neutrality. Please be seated. Case number 2025, GC, 1847. Petition for competency evaluation of Frank Harris. Counselors, your opening statements. Kimberly's attorney stood, presented his case with nervous efficiency. The witness statements, the videos, the medical records from 15 years ago when I'd been treated for stress-related headaches. He made it sound damning, made me sound like a confused old man losing his grip on reality. Stephen sat rigid next to Kimberly, staring at his hands. Then it was Victor's turn. He stood slowly, adjusted his tie, and placed a leather folder on the table. Your Honor, before we proceed with any evaluation, I'd like to present evidence that this petition is not made in good faith, but is in fact part of a carefully orchestrated fraud. Kimberly's face went still. Her attorney looked confused. Objection, Your Honor, he said weakly. That's a serious accusation. I have documentation, Victor continued. Audio recordings of the petitioner, Mrs. Kimberly Harris, discussing her plan to have Mr. Harris declared incompetent, gain control of his assets, and sell his property. These recordings are dated March 22, more than 2 months before this petition was filed. The courtroom went silent. I watched Kimberly's face transform. The confident smile melted. Her skin went from flushed to pale in seconds, the color of old parchment. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed, opened again. No sound came out. It was beautiful. Victor played the first recording. Kimberly's voice, crystal clear, "Just hold on until July. Once Stephen has power of attorney, we sell this place, split the proceeds." Her attorney's face matched hers now, pale, shocked, completely blindsided. The second recording, "I'll pay them $500 each for statements." Stephen's head came up. He stared at Kimberly with an expression I'd never seen before. Betrayal, horror, disbelief, all mixed together. "Your Honor," Victor said, "we also have financial records showing Mrs. Harris and her business partner have debts totaling $89,000, with monthly payments of $4,200 that they cannot afford. Her motivation is entirely financial, not concern for Mr. Harris's welfare." Judge Cole studied the documents. Her expression darkened. "Mrs. Harris," she said, "did you solicit false testimony from witnesses?" Kimberly's hands were shaking, actually trembling. She gripped the table edge to steady them. "Your Honor, those recordings they're taken out of context." "Did you or did you not offer to pay individuals for witness statements?" Silence. Then, barely audible, "Yes." The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. "This petition is denied. Furthermore, I'm imposing a fine of $12,000 for abuse of court process and filing under false pretenses. Mrs. Harris, you're fortunate I'm not referring this for criminal prosecution. We're done here." Kimberly collapsed back into her chair. The color had completely drained from her face. Her lips were trembling. She looked like someone who'd just watched their entire world explode. Stephen stood abruptly and walked out of the courtroom without looking at either of us. I allowed myself a small smile as we left. Justice, it turned out, looked a lot like watching a liar face the consequences of her lies. The days after the court ruling were quiet, too quiet. Stephen stayed with a friend named Marcus from his office. Kimberly remained in the house, moving through the rooms like a ghost. We didn't speak. She stayed in the master bedroom. I remained in my study and workshop. But I knew the real pressure hadn't started yet. The court fine of $12,000 was just the beginning. Her financial situation was precarious, and I intended to push it over the edge. On July 2nd, I had lunch with an old colleague, Richard Morrison, who owned commercial real estate throughout Sarasota. We met at the Blue Marlin, the same place Victor and I had first strategized back in March. "Frank, good to see you." Richard shook my hand warmly. "I heard about your court case. That was some remarkable detective work." "Thank you. Actually, that's related to why I wanted to meet. You own the building at 342 Oak Street, correct?" "I do. The one with the real estate offices." "Why?" "One of your tenants, Coastal Properties, owned by Kimberly Harris and Heather Wilson. They're behind on rent, aren't they?" Richard's expression soured. 3 months. 8,100 total. I've been patient, but my patience has limits. What if I bought that debt from you? Face value, 8,100. You get paid immediately. I assume the collection responsibility. He studied me over his coffee cup. "This is personal, isn't it?" "Very. Consider it done. I'll have my attorney drop the papers this afternoon." By July 5th, the debt was legally mine. Kimberly owed me $8,100, and she had no idea. I waited. Let the deadline pressure build. Let her scramble for solutions that didn't exist. Her real estate business was barely surviving. They'd only closed 2 properties all year. Her annual income was roughly $54,000. But the business loan payment of $4,200 per month ate up $50,400 annually. She was living on $3,600 a year after business expenses. Add the $12,000 court fine, and she was drowning. On July 15th, Victor sent the formal demand letter. Payment of $8,100 within 14 days, or we'd file suit and seek attachment of business assets. I imagined Kimberly opening that letter. The shock of realizing her landlord's debt had somehow transferred to me. The cold calculation of her impossible math. $12,000 fine plus $8,100 debt plus monthly loan payments she couldn't afford. No way out. 10 days passed. No payment, no contact. Then, on July 25th at 6:47 p.m., my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Kimberly on my doorstep. She'd aged years in the month since the court case. Dark circles under her eyes, hair uncombed, the expensive clothes replaced with jeans and a wrinkled blouse. She looked like someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks. "Frank," her voice cracked. "Please, can we talk?" I stepped aside, led her into my study. Didn't offer her a seat. Let her stand there, diminished and desperate, in the room where she tried to trick me into signing away my autonomy just 2 months ago. "I can't pay the rent debt," she said. "The court fine wiped out what little savings I had. The business is failing. If you sue, we'll have to close. I'll lose everything." "Yes," I said simply. "You will. Please." Tears started running down her face, real ones this time, not the calculated manipulation from before. "I know what I did was wrong. I was angry about my father. I wanted to hurt you. But I'm begging you, please don't destroy my life." I walked to my desk, pulled out a folder, handed it to her. Inside was the demand letter, the court judgment for the fine, and a calculation of her business debt payments for the next 5 years. "Let me make sure I understand," I said, my voice cold and precise. "You're asking me, the man you publicly humiliated at his 70th birthday party, the man you called a fool, the man you tried to have declared incompetent, the man you planned to rob of his home and his dignity, to show you mercy?" "Yes." "Where was your mercy when you married my son under false pretenses? Where was your honor when you spent 8 years lying to my face? Where was your conscience when you paid people to give false testimony about me?" She had no answer. Just stood there crying, mascara running down her cheeks. "You chose revenge over integrity," I continued. "You chose deception over honesty. You followed your father's path. He stole money. You tried to steal autonomy. The difference is, I'm not a victim like the families your father defrauded. I fought back." I pointed to the documents in her hand. "You have 14 days to pay. If you don't, I file suit. The court will order payment or force you to close your business. Either way, you lose. There has to be something, some way. There isn't. You made your choices. Now live with the consequences." She left my study with slumped shoulders and no hope in her eyes. I watched her go, feeling neither triumph nor pity, just the cold satisfaction of justice being served. The next 8 days were silent. No payment arrived, no desperate phone calls, nothing. On August 5th, Victor filed the lawsuit. The court process moved quickly. Kimberly didn't contest it. On August 15th, the judge ordered payment of $8,100 plus $3,400 in court costs and attorney's fees. Total $11,500, 30 days to pay or face asset seizure and forced bankruptcy. That same day, Heather Wilson called Kimberly. I didn't hear the conversation, but I saw the aftermath. Heather was dissolving their partnership. She'd found another real estate agent to team up with, someone whose business wasn't imploding. She blamed Kimberly for everything: the court case, the debt, the failure. On August 20th, Coastal Properties closed its doors permanently. Kimberly's income dropped to zero. She was now entirely dependent on Stephen's $67,000 annual salary. But Stephen hadn't spoken to her since the court case. He was living with his friend Marcus, paying rent there, sending minimal support money home. The walls were closing in. My plan was working perfectly. But the satisfaction I felt wasn't about her suffering. It was about accountability. She'd tried to take everything from me. Now she was facing the consequences of that choice. Justice, I'd learned over 30 years on the bench, wasn't always pretty. But it was necessary. And I wasn't done yet. August 5th arrived with the weight of inevitability. Kimberly hadn't paid the debt. Couldn't pay it. The math was simple and brutal. $12,000 court fine already depleted what little savings she had. Monthly business loan payment of $4,200 still due. And now my $8,100 demand sitting on her desk like a ticking bomb. Victor filed the lawsuit that morning. By August 15th, we had our judgment. The Sarasota County Court ordered Kimberly to pay $8,100 plus $3,400 in legal fees and court costs. Total $11,500. 30 days to comply or face forced closure of her business and asset seizure. I didn't have to wait long to see the fallout. On August 16th, I was in my workshop restoring a 1935 Hamilton pocket watch when my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Frank. Heather Wilson's voice was sharp, angry. This is your fault. You've destroyed Kimberly's business, and now you're destroying mine too. I hope you're proud of yourself. Interesting perspective, I said, adjusting my jeweler's loop. I didn't create $89,000 in business debt. I didn't try to defraud anyone. I didn't pay people for false testimony. Those were your choices. We're dissolving the partnership. I'm not going down with her ship. The line went dead. 2 days later, I saw Kimberly loading boxes into her car from their office on Oak Street. The Coastal Properties sign was already down. Heather stood by her own vehicle, arms crossed, not helping. Their 8-year partnership ended the way it began, with self-interest and calculation. By August 20th, Coastal Properties was officially closed. Kimberly's annual income of $54,000 dropped to zero. She was now entirely dependent on Stephen, who was still living at his friend Marcus's apartment, sending minimal support money while he figured out what to do with his life. The house became a war zone of silence. I stayed in my study and workshop. Kimberly remained in the master bedroom, only emerging for food or to take phone calls where I could hear her crying, begging creditors for more time. On September 1st, the explosion finally happened. I was reading in my study when I heard Stephen's voice in the living room, the first time he'd been home in weeks. 8 years, Kim. 8 years of lies. His voice carried through the walls. You married me to get revenge on my father. You never loved me. Our entire relationship was just, what? A con. Stephen, please. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Explain to me how hiding your real identity, planning to steal my father's house, buying false testimony, explain how any of that is love. Your father destroyed my family. He sent my dad to prison. Your father was a criminal. He stole from 14 families. My dad was doing his job. A pause. Did you ever actually love me, or was I just a convenient tool? The silence that followed told him everything he needed to know. I want a divorce, Stephen said, his voice cold and final. Pack your things. You have until the end of the week. I heard the door slam. A moment later, softer footsteps, Stephen coming to my study. He knocked tentatively. Come in. He stood in the doorway, looking older than his 42 years. His eyes were red, his tie loosened, his shoulders sagging under the weight of betrayal and shame. Dad, He stopped, swallowed hard. I was a blind fool. For 8 years, I let her poison everything between us. I signed papers to have you declared incompetent. I chose her over you. I'm so sorry. I set down my book, studied my son, the boy I'd raised to value honesty and integrity, who'd somehow lost his way and was now finding it again. Sit down, I said. He sat across from me, hands clasped between his knees like a child awaiting judgment. Stephen, you made mistakes, serious ones. You let yourself be manipulated, and you didn't stand up for your own father when it mattered. I paused, letting that sink in. But you're here now. You're facing the truth. That takes courage. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Maybe not yet. But you're my son. That doesn't change. What does change is trust. You'll need to earn that back. And it won't be easy or quick. He nodded, wiping his eyes. "I'll do whatever it takes. I swear. Then start by showing me through your actions, not just words. Get the divorce. Rebuild your life. Prove to me that you've learned what integrity actually means." "I will, Dad. I promise I will." After he left, I sat alone in my study, the pocket watch ticking softly on my desk. The mechanism was nearly complete. Just a few more adjustments, and it would run perfectly again. Sometimes broken things could be fixed. Sometimes they just needed the right tools, the right patience, and the willingness to do the hard work. Stephen filed for divorce on September 15th. I wasn't surprised. What did surprise me was the relief I felt. Not satisfaction at Kimberly's downfall, though there was some of that, but genuine relief that my son was finally free. The divorce proceedings moved quickly. Florida law, combined with the prenuptial agreement I'd insisted on back in 2017, made it straightforward. That prenup had seemed paranoid at the time. Victor had suggested it, citing the fact that Kimberly and Stephen hadn't known each other long. "Just a precaution," he'd said. "Protects both families." Now it protected Stephen from losing everything. On September 28th, the final judgment came through. Kimberly received her personal belongings and half of their shared marital debt, $44,500. No claim to my house, no claim to Stephen's future earnings, no alimony given the short marriage duration and her documented fraud. I watched her pack on October 3rd. She moved like a ghost through the rooms, boxing up clothes and pictures. Her face had aged a decade in 6 months, lines around her eyes, gray starting in her dark hair, the confident posture replaced with defeated slouching. When she carried the last box to her car, she paused at my study door. I was at my desk, reviewing the trust documents Victor and I would finalize the next day. "I hope you're happy," she said quietly. I looked up at her, this woman who'd spent 8 years plotting my downfall, who'd married my son for revenge, who'd tried to steal my home and my dignity. "I'm not happy, Kimberly. But I am satisfied. There's a difference." I set down my pen. "You had a choice 15 years ago. Your father went to prison because he stole from innocent people. You could have learned from his mistakes. Instead, you followed the same path. Lying, manipulating, trying to steal. The only difference is you tried to steal autonomy instead of money. In some ways, that's worse." Her face crumpled. "I loved my father. I understand that. But love doesn't justify destroying other people's lives. Your father made his choices. I gave him a fair trial and a just sentence. You made your own choices. And now you're facing the consequences of those choices, just like he did." She left without another word. I watched her car disappear down Magnolia Drive, carrying her back to whatever life awaited her. I felt no triumph in that moment, just the quiet certainty that justice had been served. The next day, October 5th, I met Victor Bennett and Herbert Morgan at the notary's office. We updated the living trust documents. Stephen was once again the primary beneficiary, but with conditions. He couldn't sell the house for 10 years after my death, and he had to provide 20 hours of free legal consultation annually to low-income families. "These conditions," I told Victor, "aren't punishment, they're education. I want Stephen to understand that wealth comes with responsibility. That our family values aren't just words, they're actions." "He'll understand," Victor assured me. "He's already enrolled in online legal courses. Wants to get his paralegal certification, maybe even go to law school part-time. Says he wants to honor what you built." That evening, Stephen came over for dinner. He brought takeout from the Blue Marlin, blackened grouper, my favorite. We ate on the back porch, watching the sunset paint Sarasota Bay in shades of orange and gold. "I've been thinking about what you said," Stephen began, setting down his fork, "about earning back trust, about showing through actions, not words. And I've started volunteer work at the Legal Aid Society, filing paperwork, helping with intake interviews. It's not much, but it's a start." I nodded. "It's a good start." We talked for hours that night, really talked, the way we hadn't in years. He told me about the red flags he'd ignored, Kimberly's evasiveness about her family, her obsession with the house's value, the way she'd slowly isolated him from me. He apologized again. I told him that actions would speak louder than apologies. October 28th was Stephen's 43rd birthday. He came over early, brought coffee and breakfast pastries. We sat on the terrace, the morning sun warm on our faces. I presented him with a gift, the 1935 Hamilton pocket watch I'd been restoring since August. It gleamed in the sunlight, the mechanism I'd painstakingly rebuilt now keeping perfect time. This watch was broken, I said, handing it to him. Every gear stripped, every spring damaged. It would have been easier to throw it away and buy a new one. But I didn't. I took it apart, understood what was broken, and fixed it piece by piece. It took patience. It took the right tools. But now it works perfectly. Stephen turned the watch over in his hands, understanding the metaphor. Relationships are like that, I continued. When they break, you have two choices: give up or do the hard work to fix them. We're doing the hard work. Thank you, Dad, his voice was thick with emotion, for not giving up on me. You're my son. I'll never give up on you. But I also won't tolerate betrayal or dishonesty. We move forward on a foundation of truth, or we don't move forward at all. We sat in comfortable silence, drinking coffee, watching boats move across the bay. Father and son, not perfect, but honest. Not without scars, but healing. You know what's funny? I said after a while. Kimberly thought revenge was about destroying me, taking my house, my dignity, my autonomy. But revenge, real justice, isn't about destruction. It's about accountability. She made choices. I held her accountable. That's all. She chose her pain over everyone else's well-being, Stephen said quietly. Exactly. 15 years ago, she decided her suffering justified hurting others. I simply showed her the consequences of that choice. I didn't destroy her life. She did that herself when she built it on lies. The October sun climbed higher, warming the day. Somewhere in Florida, Kimberly was rebuilding her life from scratch. Somewhere in Sarasota, Heather Wilson was running her real estate business without the partner who dragged her into fraud. And here, on Magnolia Drive, in the house I'd lived in for 45 years, my son and I were rebuilding something more important than revenge. We were rebuilding trust. And this time, it was built on truth. Justice, I'd learned over 70 years and 3 decades on the bench, wasn't always swift. But when it finally arrived, it was worth the wait. If you enjoyed this story of justice and accountability, please like and subscribe to continue hearing more compelling tales of revenge, redemption, and consequences. Your support means everything to us. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next story.